So I'm going to start by just acknowledging that applying to law school is a really big and really expensive decision, and it requires a lot of reflection. So there may be people here who are still on the fence about this, and that's totally fair. However, I'm not going to be talking about the decision today because this presentation is geared toward people who know they're applying to law school. And I'm definitely going to kind of get into the weeds with the details on that. So I would encourage you, if you're still thinking about it, to reach out to Career Ed, set up some appointments for one-on-one advising, lean on your own personal network, have those tough conversations, think through the pros and cons. But again, I'm not going to be getting into any of that today. So assuming that most people are planning to apply to law school in the coming months, let's start by looking at a sample timeline for applying in the fall. I always like to work backwards. I'm sure some of you have already heard me go through this, but if we are assuming that your goal is to submit applications between September and December of 2021, which is the ideal, not everyone's going to do that, and that's all right. I'm working with people now who are still applying to law school, and they will get into law school and they will go to law school, and that's fine. But you know, you're planning early, so we'll assume that this is your goal. So if that's your goal, then working backwards, but I'm actually going to start at the bottom here so we can take it from like this moment right now. The first thing you're going to be thinking about doing as soon as possible is, if you believe you might be eligible for a fee waiver, you're going to apply for that fee waiver soon. The next thing is aiming to take your first LSAT. Some of you may already have taken it or may be registered for the April LSAT. Many of you are likely going to take it this summer or maybe in the fall. The next thing is May or June, toward the end of the semester, talking to your recommenders and making sure you make those requests for recommendations. Lots of stuff is going to happen this summer, as I'm sure you know. Registering for the LSAC Credential Assembly Service if you haven't already, starting to submit your transcripts. Then, depending on what's going on in your life and your LSAT prep, you may be drafting and editing your personal statement and your other essays and your resume over the summer and fall. In August, September-ish is a good time to narrow down your list of schools. September is when applications open, usually either September 1st or September 15th. So that's when you're going to start to have access through your LSAC account to the actual applications where you can start filling out the short answers and entering all that personal info, all the stuff that you haven't been able to see until the applications open, and you can just start getting that stuff out of the way as soon as they open in September. Then later in the fall, October, November, you may be retaking the LSAT if you need to. That can be a good time to start researching outside scholarships and applying for those. And then again, the goal is ideally in the fall, starting to submit your applications. Okay, so I mentioned the LSAC fee waiver. I know that this does not apply to everyone, but since it does apply to some and it is worth a lot of money and it is very important, I want to make sure that I address it. So the first thing is to check your eligibility. The language that they use to describe eligibility is extreme need or absolute inability to pay. And then there is a citizenship or residency requirement. You'll have to take a look on their website to see if you meet their eligibility requirements, because there are some other categories that you may fit into. So the reason I'm bringing this up as the very first thing is because you need to actually submit your fee waiver request 4 to 6 weeks before the registration deadline for the LSAT you want to take. So this is coming up fast if you're thinking about taking the LSAT this summer. The June LSAT registration deadline is April 30th. 6 weeks before that is next week. So if you think there's any chance you might be eligible for the fee waiver, definitely start to look into it. The things you're going to need are tax forms, supporting documents. You may need things from your parents or other family members, so it's definitely good to plan ahead on this. The fee waiver includes a lot of things. It's worth a lot of money. 2 LSATs, 1 credential assembly service registration, 6 CAS reports, a subscription to the $100 LSAT prep option that LSAC has available, and score preview. And then I just noted at the bottom here that law schools may also waive their application fees. Unfortunately, on top of the LSAT fees, you'll also need to pay an application fee from each law school, but they may waive their fees for LSAT fee waiver recipients, or they may have their own process for requesting fee waivers. So you do need to do the individual research on that for each law school. LSAT dates and registration. Some of you may already be on top of this, but I do want to lay it all out here just so you can see that the next 2 LSATs in April and June are going to be LSAT Flex exams, which I'm sure you have heard about. That means that they are online, remote proctored, and they are 3 sections long. The registration deadline for April has passed, and obviously, you wouldn't have time now to prepare for it anyway, but the June deadline is coming up on April 30th. So beginning in August, though, the week of August 14th, and from then on, these tests are no longer being called LSAT Flex. They are being called LSAT, although they will still be online and remote proctored, but they'll be 4 sections and they'll have 1 break, just like the LSAT was before there was an LSAT Flex. So that's something to just note and have in mind. And then I listed here the tests through the whole application season because the January 15th test is the last test for most law schools. So take a look at the LSAC website to see the registration deadlines and the score release dates. You might want to consider score preview if you are a first-time test taker. For that extra fee, they will let you see your score before you decide if you want to keep it or if you want to cancel it. So that can give comfort to people sometimes. And then don't forget that there is this additional component, the LSAT writing. This opens up 8 days before the LSAT that you're registered for. And then you can you can take it before your LSAT or you can take it after your LSAT. It's online, you choose when you want to take it, but you do need to take it before your score is released. So I know anytime LSAT comes up, people always ask me about preparation. And I give very frustrating answers about how it is really personal and individual for each person, but that's the truth. I have seen many, many different ways of preparing for the LSAT work for different people. But I did want to at least touch on this since I know it's on people's minds. So the conventional wisdom here is that you should be spending at least 200 to 300 hours studying for the LSAT. And usually that should be over at least 3 months. For some people, it's much longer, especially if you're working and you're needing to squeeze it in evenings and weekends. But what I would say is pretty much true across the board, even if you're not studying if you're studying in many different ways. What everyone should probably start with is taking a timed practice exam to establish your baseline and get a sense of where your strengths lie and what sections you're finding most challenging. And from there, once you have that information, you can consider the range of options available to you. So that's everything from the free Khan Academy resources on the LSAC website, books, if you can get your hands on books, self-paced courses, private tutoring, and if you are not already participating in the Wellesley Lawyers Network group on Facebook, I would definitely suggest to join, if only for this one reason. They have a lot of advice threads on LSAT prep, and it can be helpful to hear what has worked for different people recently, since I took the LSAT a long time ago. So I think it's great for you to hear from people who've done it just, in the last year or so. When we're talking about testing, the GRE always comes up. So I wanted to touch on that as well. Although I will say that I think this is a conversation best had individually, because again, it's quite personal. We don't see a huge proportion of law school applicants applying using GRE scores. Most people are still taking the LSAT, but most often when we do see people applying with GRE scores, they're joint degree applicants, or they're people who have already gone to graduate school, so they already have that GRE score. Or in some cases, it's people whose LSAT just is not reflecting their actual ability, and they find that they're able to get a better score on the GRE that's more reflective of their actual academic ability. So at this point, we've got almost 70 law schools accepting the GRE, including most of the top 20 schools. And in terms of predictive value, I wanted to share that we really don't have as many stats, not nearly as many stats on GRE medians as we do on LSAT medians. So it is harder to make predictions using your GRE score about, where you are likely to get in. But just starting last year, law schools that accept the GRE did start to release their GRE medians on their required disclosures. If you don't know what I'm talking about when I say required disclosures, I'll give some brief background. The American Bar Association requires law schools to release a bunch of data every year for transparency. So these are called the ABA required disclosures. They include everything from the LSAT and GPA medians to percentage of students on scholarship to diversity of faculty and student body at a law school. It's really tons of data. These are called 509 reports. And so if you want to see them, you can go to each law school's website or just Google 509, and you can find some GRE information now. So you heard me mention the Credential Assembly Service. Excuse me. Some of you may already be signed up for this. You may already know what I'm talking about, but for anyone who's going to need to sign up this summer, CAS is the centralized sort of clearinghouse that you are going to be using to apply to law school. So it's where you're going to have your letters of recommendation sent, your transcripts sent. It's where you will be filling out these applications. It's all centralized through LSAC. So all of the ABA approved law schools or law school applications are available through your CAS account. And you do want to, sorry, register and pay for CAS about 4 to 6 weeks before your first application deadline. So for most of you, if you're applying this fall, you want to be sure to sign up for this summer. It's $195. And what it includes, as we sort of touched on, is the transcript summarization, creation of law school reports, letter of recommendation processing, and electronic application processing. A few more details on transcripts. You heard me, give you a heads up about sending your transcripts, but here's a little bit more about what this looks like. Sorry. So you're going to be sending your Wellesley transcripts and any non-Wellesley transcripts that you have, with some exceptions that I'm going to talk through. The transcripts take about 2 weeks to process. So this is a good thing to get out of the way this summer. I've pasted here what the registrar tells you on their website about how to order transcripts by signing into My Wellesley. It's all done electronically. Parchment will send your transcript directly to LSAC when you request it. It costs $8. Regarding non-Wellesley transcripts, definitely read the rules carefully. I have this linked here, and I can't remember if I said before. I have a lot of links throughout this presentation, which I know you can't access right now. So I will email the presentation to anyone who signed up on Handshake for the presentation. If you did not sign up on Handshake and you would like me to send you the slides so you can access the links, just shoot me an email at some point. My email address is np100@wellesley.edu. So back to non-Wellesley transcripts, definitely read the rules through carefully. They're quite detailed. They have lots of specifics and exceptions. You can reach out to me if you have questions about a specific situation that you're in. If you studied abroad for 1 academic year or less, your transcript from the study abroad institution is generally not required to be sent separately to LSAC, but you may send it. I want to note that Stanford does require that you send Stanford directly your study abroad transcripts. That's a weird exception. Another question that you get a lot is about MIT transcripts. You do not have to send separate MIT transcripts to LSAC because we have what's called an interinstitutional relationship with MIT, and your MIT grades appear on your Wellesley transcript. So that's not something that you need to worry about. However, Babson and most other schools where you might have taken courses either during the school year or during the summer, you do need to send a separate transcript for those. So what does LSAC do with Wellesley grades? Because we've got some unique situations, right, with shadow grading and with MIT, and of course with the spring 2020 mandatory credit non. So this is an example from a few years ago, so anonymous, of how this looks to law schools when they receive the law school report. You can see the first red arrow that I have at the top here. This is MIT. So you can see the MIT grades are showing up here on the law school report, just like the Wellesley grades. So nothing to worry about there. Then the second red arrow that I have here is unconverted. So basically what this means is your shadow grades, your credit non courses, these are showing up as unconverted credits. So they're not taking like your pass and converting it to something on the 4.0 scale that's then going to bring down your GPA. They're leaving it as unconverted. So they're showing that you have the credits for the coursework, but they're not factoring it into your GPA. So that's what unconverted means. The basic takeaway is you should not be blindsided by getting a different GPA when LSAC does the calculation. It should be the same GPA as your Wellesley GPA. So hopefully this gives you some comfort seeing this, or it might completely confuse you. If it does, feel free to follow up with me. I do want to note some of the calculations and information that LSAC is giving to law schools in the law school report, because I think it's interesting for you to be aware of it. LSAC gives them your cumulative GPA for all the schools you attended. So if you transferred from another school, or if you took summer courses, if you have transcripts from other schools, they're going to put that all together and give you a cumulative GPA. They're also going to give you a degree GPA. So that will be, your degree, your GPA from each institution, each individual institution. So you'll get your Wellesley GPA. But what I think is probably most interesting and most reassuring to people to know is that LSAC also gives law schools information about general grading patterns from your undergraduate school. So what that means is that they take the data from all the law school applications from your institution who applied in the last 3 years, and they use that to calculate a college mean GPA. So that's obviously going to look a lot different from Wellesley versus perhaps a large state school or another school where there's known grade inflation, for example. So it helps when admissions officers are looking at that, it helps them put your GPA in context and understand if there is grade inflation or deflation happening. And then lastly, they're showing a semester GPA. So if you do have a pattern perhaps of improving GPA over time, that's going to be highlighted by showing the semester GPA. Letters of recommendation. I mentioned multiple times already, and so hopefully you kind of have it on your calendar and in your brain by now that around the end of this semester is a great time to start requesting those, May or June, because that is really courteous to your professors or whoever else you are using as recommenders. It gives them that entire summer to be planning and thinking and writing and then submitting the letters in the fall to LSAC. Most law schools are requiring 2 letters of recommendation. but there may be an optional third, there may be an optional third and fourth. So definitely check each school's requirements. Usually you're going to be asking professors, perhaps supervisors or coaches. Maybe if you do volunteer work, maybe a volunteer supervisor. It'll be dependent upon your individual situation. You will want to ask at least one professor, if at all possible. Some law schools even require 2 professors, because it's really important that you have at least one person who can speak to your ability to succeed in a rigorous academic environment. And ideally, someone who can also talk about your research and writing skills, especially if you have a course where you've really had to show some analysis of some dense and complex material, show that you have attention to detail and that you can formulate an argument when dealing with that type of material. That's really relevant for law schools to see. And also how you engage in the classroom. So I have a note here not to worry about someone who has an important title. It doesn't matter if you could choose between the head of your academic department or a professor who's even a visiting professor and doesn't have that big title, but they know you really well. That's always the one you should choose. The title is not important. The name is not important. It's not important that the department that they work in is like somewhat law related. That's not what it's about. It's always about who knows you best, who you are as a person, who you are in the classroom community, what perspective you're going to be bringing to the law school. That's what's important. And then just some sort of details about how to make the request. It's always nice if you can make the request in person or at least verbally. I know there's not a lot of in-person going on these days, but if you can even talk to them over Zoom or over the phone, that's always a nice thing. Email if necessary, but I think people usually appreciate that extra effort that comes with asking face-to-face if you can. Definitely express your gratitude and offer to be as helpful as you can in the process. Maybe that is going to look like providing some supporting material. That could be your resume, that could be your personal statement, sharing some background about your career goals and why you want to go to law school if that's not something they're not already very familiar with. And in some cases, maybe even offering some ideas for talking points that you were hoping that they could cover. In some cases, you might have a professor who really knows about the improvement in your writing skills because maybe that has happened over the course of a couple of classes that you took with that professor. And maybe that's what you want them to say because that's something that's important for you to get across in your application. It's fine for you to mention that to them. Or maybe it's overcoming adversity if it's a professor that you had in spring 2020 when everything fell apart and they can speak to how you handled that. It's great for you to mention that to them. They won't think that it's pushy. They will actually be really appreciative. I know I have been appreciative when people have given me some direction in writing letters of recommendation. Okay, so personal statement is something that, depending on when you're taking the LSAT and what else you have going on in your life, you may be starting sometime soon, or you may be pushing this off till closer to the fall. But I know it's something that probably weighs on most of us. So I wanted to at least talk about kind of where you might start and what this process can look like. The law schools give very little guidance on the topic and length of a personal statement, which is intentional because they want to see what you do in the face of that open-endedness, and they want to see, what judgment you use on topic and length. But that can still be really frustrating, I know, and it can still feel like they are trying to hide the ball. So I don't want you to feel that way, and I can definitely, help you as much as you might need when it comes to drafting a personal statement. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Typically, you're aiming for about 2 pages, double spaced, for the length of a personal statement. With some exceptions, there may be schools where they say, that there's a page limit of 3 pages or perhaps less. So check, for each specific school. But most people will be writing 2 pages double spaced. And so if you do choose to go over, you need to show them that you really needed that extra space, because if they are reading hundreds of statements that are 2 pages and yours is 3, they want to know that you really did need that extra space. It's called a personal statement because they really do want it to be personal. They want to get to know you. They want you to use this limited space that you have to share something that they can't learn from the rest of your application. So it's really important not to rehash stuff that's in your resume, or, walk them through like your path that you took from one job to another job. That's not a good use of your space. Don't tell the school why they're great, or pull professors' names or names of clinics or journals or classes from their website, because they know they're great and they know what professors and classes they have to offer. So again, it's just not a wise use of your limited space. So I listed a few things here that people can sometimes use as topics for their personal statements, but really the sky's the limit, and it can be as personal as you would like it to be. So definitely something that it's perhaps better spoken about one-on-one. I'll just leave you with on this slide that it's really never too early to start at least like jotting down some notes, even if they're just stream of consciousness. Any stories, anything that you can jot down early can sometimes save you some angst later on, when you're staring at that blank page and feeling like you need to come up with the perfect anecdote. So even just little notes, throughout the spring and summer, you might be grateful later that you've done that. I did jot down here just a few really effective personal statements I've come across in the last few months. So I'm going to give you a minute to take a quick look at them. These aren't meant to be like models for you to follow, simply examples for you to see that there are really a wide range of topics that you might choose. Okay, what about optional essays? You've heard me mention them a little bit, and you might be familiar with what I mean by that. If a school says their essays are optional, they are not required. So don't ever feel like you have to do an optional essay, especially if it's a why this school essay and it's really not a top choice school for you. Don't do it just because you feel like you have to. But they are a good opportunity for you to share more about yourself if you do have something to say. I have heard admissions officers say when a person didn't take the opportunity to fill out an optional essay and it felt like there were some questions in their application that could have been answered by the optional essay, that they really wished that they had a more complete picture. So if you have something to say, do take the opportunity. What I mean by optional essays, this varies from school to school, but usually what we're talking about is a diversity statement, maybe a why this school essay. Some schools offer that, and then addenda. And if you don't know what I'm talking about when I say addenda, that is your chance to address things that might be unclear in your application, or where assumptions maybe can be made. For example, if you took the LSAT a bunch of times, or if you had a big jump or conversely dip in your LSAT score, if there's something like unexplained or unusual about your GPA, maybe you had one really tough semester for personal reasons, maybe you had a big increase or decrease in your GPA. And then if you have any honor code or disciplinary issues, an addendum is just a chance for you to clear up any assumptions that might be made and explain what was really happening there. And it can be very, very helpful. Schools often say that they wish people would write addenda. So don't feel like you shouldn't because you're telling a sob story. If you have something to explain, then take the opportunity to explain it. And then lastly, there's these ones that are meant to be fun, which may or may not be to you, but there are ones like Georgetown's top 10 list and other optional essays that have, interesting topics like that. Resume, I'm going to deal with this quickly. Unlike resumes for job applications, you do not need to feel limited to one page for your law school resume. The reason for that is because for a job application, you are tailoring your resume specifically to that job. So you may be removing experiences that you've had that are less relevant. But for law school admissions, the admissions committees want to have a complete picture of your experience and of what you've done and why you've done it. So it is okay to bring back onto your resume some of that stuff that might have fallen off while you've been applying to jobs. And it is okay for it to run over one page. Do check for school-specific instructions. There are some schools that ask for details like whether experiences that you've had are paid or unpaid, that ask for the number of hours a week you put into different jobs or extracurriculars. And as always, be very vigilant about typos and grammar, but really like even more so for law school, because these for the most part are nitpicky lawyers reviewing this resume. So just, if you normally have your resume reviewed by 2 other people, have it reviewed by 4 other people, because you just want to be extra vigilant about that and then as concise as possible. So you saw from the timeline that one of the next things is going to be making your law school list. A lot goes into this. So this is a pretty dense slide. Again, lots of links here. So I will send you the slides so you can access these links and follow up on this when the time comes. You're going to hear me say a lot, I'm sure many of you who I've advised have heard me say this a lot, that law school admissions is not all about your LSAT and GPA, even though Reddit would tell you otherwise. But when it comes to making your law school list, there's still a very good place to start. You need to start somewhere, and that is a helpful place to start. So I'm giving these resources that you can use to start plugging in your LSAT and GPA when you do have your LSAT. First, there's the LSAC GPA and LSAT search. One of my favorites is a chart that 7Sage has. It's actually downloadable as a Google Sheet. So you can download it, you can filter, you can play with it, you can make it your own, and that can be very, very, very helpful. Law School Transparency, I'm sure you've heard of. That's they have these reports that will estimate your anticipated admissions. Take that with a massive grain of salt, because it is definitely not all based on LSAT and GPA, but you can take a look at that. Then something I really like is this Explore JD tool on Access Lex. I like it because it asks you a series of questions. Of course, LSAT, GPA are in there, but it's not the only thing. It asks you questions about things like cost of attendance, whether you want to be in a walkable city, how important it is for you to be like in a smaller environment versus a larger environment. So you answer all those questions and it recommends schools to you to check out. So I would definitely take a look at that, play with it, and see what it comes up with. After you use LSAT and GPA as a starting point, definitely consider location and size. Law school is hard, right? So thinking about the environment that you thrive in, where you have a support system, these are things that are definitely important to take into account. Some people know that they will do better if they're, close to their like social or family support system. Some people do better at smaller school versus a larger school, in a city versus a rural environment. So definitely, think that through carefully. I would venture to say that that is even more important than a school's ranking. Then also, you can run a quick LinkedIn search of a school's alums to see where they are mostly ending up. And that can help give you a sense too of like, okay, if I move to California for law school, like how likely is it that I'm going to feel like I have to stay in California? If you've ever run this type of search on LinkedIn, you've seen that it actually pulls up a bar graph of like locations that alums are working in, which is really, really helpful to see. Definitely consider specializations and joint degrees if that's something that you're interested in. I put here this link to the Book of Law School lists, which has tons of lists of different joint degrees and specializations at all the law schools. But, and we can talk more about this on a one-on-one basis, but do recognize that this may not be as important as you think it is, but I won't go too deep into that right now. Next, this is my favorite. Some of you have probably seen me run comparisons on these before. Do some rigorous comparisons of data points that matter to you. So that might be employment, it might be clerkships, cost of attendance, scholarships, diversity of the student body. There are so many available data points that you can compare, and that can help you make a really informed and data-driven decision about what schools are going to be a good fit for you. So I put an example here of a report that I ran just as an illustration. I used the analytics tool by Access Lex, which allows you to do side-by-side comparisons of up to 5 law schools at a time, using whatever data points are important to you. So here, I just chose 4 Boston law schools because I thought that would be interesting. And the data point that I chose is the percent of graduates employed in public interest law. So, it took me less than a minute to run this, and it is super helpful to see the difference between just these 4 Boston schools, ranging from Boston College only sending 2.6% of their grads into public interest law, Northeastern sending close to 20% of their grads into public interest law. So you can see a lot of interesting things from running these comparisons, and I highly recommend doing it when you get to that point. I know you're probably not in the weeds on that yet, but you'll get there. Okay, so moving on to COVID and the continuing impact of COVID on law school admissions. We're talking about applying this fall for fall 2022. So this is pretty far off, and there's a lot of speculation involved here. So I'm going to kind of make some educated guesses and do a little bit of total guessing, but hopefully it's somewhat helpful. I can share that we do know now that applications were up 20% for the 2020-2021 cycle. And then as much as 60% at certain schools. So definitely, a notable increase. I'm seeing that in the people in the results of people that I'm working with more wait lists than usual, but hopefully there will be more movement off of those wait lists as well. LSAT registrations are up so far in 2021. So most people think that indicates a continuing upward trend in law school applications. Unclear if it's going to be up as much next year as it was this year, but that's the educated guess that most people are making, that applications will be up. A question that I get sometimes is whether people are deferring a lot for like in this cycle, and whether that will impact application or admissions for people wanting to go in fall 2022. If that is something that has occurred to you, I want you to know that that's not really a major concern. For the exact same reason that you are nervous about that happening, that's the exact reason that the law schools won't be doing it. They are not granting deferrals at a rate higher than in past years because they also do not want to throw off their cycles for next year. So they're not granting deferrals for, they're granting them for the same reasons they always have, and they're not granting them at higher rates than they ever have. So that's not something that you really need to be worrying about. Visiting law schools has not been possible in the past year in most cases, but for those of you who are applying this fall, that's probably going to start to become a reality, thankfully, because I know that will be helpful for many of you when you're making these decisions. There are some schools who are already starting to do masked and socially distanced in-person visits. And I imagine that's going to just start to increase more and more as we all start to get vaccinated. So hopefully that is not going to impact you in the same way as it has impacted people in this past cycle. And then lastly, it's really unclear if hybrid or remote learning is still going to be here in fall 2022. If so, hopefully it'll just be here as an option and not as a requirement. But I'm putting here again that it's not going to be considered a valid reason to defer. So if there's any part of you that's like, oh yeah, I'll just apply now, and if for some reason it's hybrid learning, I'll defer, you'll probably need a different reason to defer than just not wanting to do hybrid or remote learning. But hopefully that will be a non-issue. Okay, so the financial aspect of law school is something that we could spend an entire session on, if not multiple sessions. So I'm going to do my best to give an intro and then direct you to a bunch of other really good resources. So most people finance their legal education through a combination of merit-based aid from their law school, so aid that they do not need to pay back that's coming from the law school, loans, and then external scholarships. When you get accepted to law school, you'll also receive an award letter that tells you about any of these institutional grants and scholarships that you'll get from your school. It's going to be a lot of information, and each award letter from each different school is going to look a little bit different. So it might be a little bit challenging to compare apples to apples. So definitely always feel free to contact the financial aid office with questions. I know sometimes there can be some nerves around that, like, oh God, if I call them, are they going to rescind my acceptance? But no, they're there to help you. They want to help you understand it. So definitely contact them, reach out to me. We all want to help you understand this and make a smart financial decision. There might be some circumstances where you can ask for reconsideration of your financial package. That is basically another way of saying, like, negotiating with them if you get a higher offer from another school. Those circumstances are pretty specific, or at least the circumstances under which you might have a solid argument for that. So again, like, definitely reach out and we can talk about that when the time comes, which will probably be about a year from now. There are school-specific scholarships. They're often geared toward public interest students, since, as we know, if you want to practice public interest law, you're looking at lower salaries than if you want to go into private practice. So those are things to definitely research once you have your list of schools. Make sure you understand whether they have some specific scholarships and understand whether you need to apply for those separately. In most cases, it's not an entirely separate application with a separate deadline. It's the same application, but there might be an additional essay that you may need to fill out. The FAFSA is a part of this process. That can be filled out anytime after October 1st. And then outside scholarships, winter is a really good time to research them, especially if you've gotten through your LSAT and application process, gotten all those applications in. Hopefully, you can breathe a sigh of relief and then take a little time to look into outside scholarships. So I did list some resources here for both just finances in general, but also finding scholarships. Access Lex, you've heard me mention a bunch of times. They are a great resource, specifically when it comes to this whole kind of intro to the financial side of things. They have this really great short course called Paying for Law School. It's got a ton of information and details that, way beyond what I could cover here. They have a scholarship data bank. This is new as of last week. It's awesome. It has almost 18 scholarships and it's searchable. So when the time comes, definitely use that as a resource. Another couple of good scholarship lists. LSAC has a scholarship page, and Yale Law has an outside scholarships page. Even if you're not applying to Yale, even if you don't have any interest in Yale, it's for anyone. It's just a resource that they have. So those are some things you might check out. And then the last thing I wanted to leave you with is just all of the resources that are out there. There is a growing movement, thankfully, toward transparency in law school admissions. And that's, it's so important for us to try to get information out there in order to make the legal profession more inclusive. And I think the really good law school deans of admission are recognizing that and trying to make an effort to do that. So what I included here is just FAQs. Definitely make good use of the FAQs on every law school's website. The answers to a lot of your questions are there, even like the really detailed ones about, what should I write my personal statement about and how long should my resume be? Like there is a lot of information there. One of my favorite podcasts from the deans of admissions at Yale Law and Harvard Law. Again, even if you're not applying there, it's just a really honest take on law school admissions. I think you'll find it helpful. One of my favorite people, Dean Z, Sarah Zierfoss at UMichigan Law, has a great YouTube channel. So take a look at that. And then LSAC also has a bunch of webinars that they've recorded that you can access on their website. So that is all from me.